Here's what's coming up on today's show.
So your best marketing comes from your current clients. And so it becomes, in the beginning, a chicken and egg thing. How do you grow and create, referrals if you've never spoken before?
This is the Balanced Growth Show with Dr. Travis Perry, helping successful business professionals like you achieve balance in their lives.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Balanced Growth Show. I am your host, Dr. Travis Perry. Today, we have a special guest, Stan Phelps. Stan is a Forbes contributor, TEDx speaker, IBM Futurist, certified speaking professional, and best-selling author of the Goldfish Series. A show and tell speaker, Stan empowers audiences to take action that delivers bottom-line impact. He strives to change the paradigm of marketing by encouraging audiences to focus on experiences as the ultimate competitive differentiator. He believes Purposeful DX wins the hearts of employees and customers. And differentiation ultimately boosts loyalty, retention, referrals, and results. Stan, so great to have you on the show today.
Dr. Travis, happy to be here.
It's been fun. I've been following, fanboying for a while on LinkedIn and seeing all the stuff you're doing. Fantastic marketer, fantastic human being. I love what you're about and the books that you've written. We're gonna dive into some of that here later on. But before we get there, tell us quickly what drove you to be an author, to be a speaker. How did you get to where you're at today?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So my background is in marketing. So I worked for 2 decades as a marketer. I started in sports. So I worked on the agency side with the likes of IMG, a group called Synergy. And then I also worked on the brand side with Adidas, the New York Yankees, the PGA of America. And about 2007, Travis, I saw that marketing was changing dramatically. And it led me kind of to rethink what I was doing, because all I knew was I was part of the problem and I wanted to be part of the solution. And I had this kind of moment of truth, and it led me to start a project where I collected over 1,000 examples. I crowdsourced, and that became the first book. I thought maybe it was one book, but it's been a journey of just kind of discovery, and one book has kind of led to the next. And just over 11 years ago, I took the leap to become a full-time author and speaker.
Fantastic. So now you're touring around, you're on stages, you're writing more books than I can keep up with. And it's fantastic to see this transformation. So why is it so important for you, as you're growing your business, that you have great balance in your life? Let's talk about balance for a second.
Yeah, I think of balance kind of as, wellness is kind of the thing I really latch onto. And do you remember the days of playing Trivial Pursuit, Travis? We're old enough to know when that was like the rage, right? And you had this kind of circular piece, and do you remember there were 6 categories and you got these little slices in there? And to me, I think about balance as making sure that all of these little slices of my life, my professional life, my family, my physical well-being, my mental well-being, how I connect on kind of a spiritual or faith basis, and the idea that all of these little things have to kind of be in this little wheel, this round wheel, have to kind of fit. And if anything is out of balance, then that wheel starts to kind of, jump and stutter. And so I try to, as much as I can, to really be mindful of creating that balance across those 5 or 6 areas of my life.
Yeah, I do remember those days, Trivial Pursuit. I also, the game of life is kind of an interesting one too. You have these different challenges. And do you go to college? Do you just start in a job? And you kind of take some risks along the way. Maybe not as good analogy as Trivial Pursuit, but I like that. That's important to you. It's wellness.
Right. Yeah.
And most people tell me that balance is when they have their highest priorities in order and they're making time for them.
Right.
Hence the Make Time Institute. So, as an entrepreneur, you've been able to scale your business and grow. You even just said, hey, you made the leap from marketer to full-time author and speaker, which is not an easy thing to do, right? This is not something that someone says, hey, I'm going to be a speaker today. Tomorrow, unless they're an A1 celebrity,
Right.
this is not something that just comes. And even then, it doesn't make them a great speaker. So let's talk about what have you done to get there? What's brought you the growth in your business while you've been trying to keep that balance?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I wouldn't recommend anyone to make that leap. It is a difficult journey because as in financial advising and almost every business, it's driven by word of mouth, right? So your best marketing comes from your current clients. And so it becomes in the beginning a chicken and egg thing. How do you grow and create referrals if you've never spoken before? So you really have to hustle in the beginning. You really, a lot of lessons, you have to understand who you're for, like who your best clients are, and you have to be dead focused on solving problems for those clients. So it took a while to get it going. The big lesson I had was when I left and made the jump, Dr. Travis, my old agency said, hey, we'd love in the transition for you to do 3 days a week with us. And I thought to myself, well, that's great. That gives me kind of a runway to establish the business. And I fully believe this. If you're going to commit to anything, you can't be 60% committed or 40% committed. If you treat it like a hobby, you get hobby results. And so that really was the impetus for me to go about 7 months in, even though that was a nice cushion, to go, I either need to be all in, I can't be halfway in.
Great point. Two really amazing things you said there. Like, who are you for? Who's your ideal client? Who is it that you really connect with? And I mentioned this on the show so many times. The reason why Achieving Balance, the book, did so well is I made it for advisors. It's all about financial planning. Yes, other people can, glean the principles out, but that's who I served that audience with that book. But the other aspect that you mentioned there, I see a lot of people doing this. Well, this is my main thing, but I've got this side hustle and I've got this side hustle. And quite honestly, we're in the economy of side hustles right now.
Right.
And that's okay. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a side hustle, but if that wants to become, your mainstay, it can't be your side hustle forever.
Right.
As you made that jump, you made the leap, you're able to say, okay, now I'm all in. This is it. It's time to go. My coaching business was not where I needed to be. And I thought I could be in academia and do my coaching on the side, and eventually I would transition out. It doesn't work that way.
No.
It just doesn't work that way. You're going to be a really great researcher and teacher and okay coach, or you're going to be a great coach and part-time researcher. And I chose the latter just because I wanted to make that jump. And once I did, it did take off, but there was hustle. There was some grinding there. So I appreciate you mentioning this because there are a few out there listening probably now, and some friends of mine and others who struggle with this concept. And I think you wrote a book, your Pink Goldfish book, that talks a little bit about that. You want to maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so the Pink Goldfish is really, it's one of the ones I'm most proud of because the book hits both on an individual level, Travis, as well as on an organizational one. And it's the idea of, it's one of the books that I have that's more strategic. It's how do you stand out in the marketplace? And it turns out that only about 3% of people have the capability to stand out. And so the question is, where are the other 97%? And the 97% are stuck in what we call the box, right? They're constrained by the norms of the industry that they're in, right? What does everyone else do? We benchmark whatever the leader does, and we start to, whether we want to admit it or not, we start to do those same things. And what my co-author and I, David Rendell, and I found out is that there's only two ways to stand out. And I try to live this every day is, one, how do you embrace who you are, even the imperfect elements of who you are? And how do you double and triple down on those things? We call that philosophy lopsiding. And then how do you look at what everyone else does as normal? And how do you look at what the key things are? And you want to do the key things, but question everything else. And one of the ways you can stand out is by doing less of what everyone else does as normal. And we call that withholding. So to me, pink one is really interesting. It's the idea that our flaws, the things that truly make us unique, actually hold the key to what makes us awesome.
I have a really fantastic person that you probably have connected with. Actually, I'm not sure. He's also a speaker. Incredibly funny. Jason Hewlett. Do you know who Jason Hewlett is?
Oh my God. Jason is amazing.
He talks about this concept as well. He calls it, was it your unique ability, or no, it's not that. It's another concept.
Very similar in approach. He has a 3-step process. He says you have to identify, right, what makes you unique. You want to clarify that, so you want to make sure it's relevant to your audience. And then he talks about the concept of magnifying it.
Man, you nailed it. Nailed it. But I just remember his gift, because he tells a story of like how he was in the dentist chair and he was fooling around with the dentist because he could open his mouth so wide and make these funny faces. And the dentist's like, Jason, that's it. That's your unique thing. What are you talking about? But,
right.
That's what it reminds me of, Stan, because I work with advisors and coaches and entrepreneurs, and I think they struggle because they do exactly what you just said. They fall in line with the industry. They fall in line with everybody else is doing. And quite honestly, they kind of, with the fish analogy, they kind of go in with the school and they're swimming around and they're afraid to jump out. They're afraid to be different. They're afraid to stand out because of whatever, fear of, missing out or doing something wrong, or there's all sorts of, illegitimate fears out there that create these issues, where if they could just do what they do well, I podcast, I speak, I write books, and, I coach. If I can do those 4 things, 80-90% of my day, I stay with what I call in my work sweet spot. Right. I'm golden. It's when I get outside of those things, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing with technology. I don't know what I'm doing with this piece or that piece.
Right.
I want to hand it off, and I'm more than happy to hire someone else to do that, to automate it with a, software process or whatever. What do you suggest? How do you, maybe let's flip this around. How do you suggest that people find that? Jason has his process, but what do you say? Hey, if you're struggling with that, how can you figure this out?
Yeah. So in the book, Pink Goldfish, we actually have done recently the 2.0 version of it. There's an assessment inside of it where you look at 40 different characteristics and you identify your strengths and you also identify your weaknesses. And what you realize, if we're really being honest, is that every weakness has a corresponding strength, right? And what we're taught to do is to try to push down our weakness or hide our weakness. And what Dave and I talk about is that's the wrong thing. You can't change who you are, right? You can only become a greater version of yourself. And so one of the stories that we talk about in the book, and it's this amazing analogy. Have you ever heard of the art form kintsugi, Travis?
No, I can't say.
Started in Japan back like 600 years ago, and there was a Japanese shogun. And the quick story is he had like a tea bowl that he absolutely loved. And one day it smashed into pieces and he was gutted. And so he called a couple craftsmen in and they gave it to him, and they came back like 2 days later, and they had used this black, ugly glue and metal staples and he held it in his hand, and his heart just sank. Like and give him credit. He's like, he was in the Osaka region. He called in all the best craftsmen, and he gave him the bowl, and he said, you have to fix this. And so you've probably seen pictures of these bowls or pieces of pottery, but they went away, and it took about 2 weeks. They meticulously cleaned it, and they used lacquer and gold to put it back together. And they brought it back to him, and he held this thing that had these just glowing seams in it. And it was even better, right, than when it was even perfectly new. And it became such a thing that it became an art form. And what the funny thing is that collectors would take perfectly good pieces of pottery and do what? Smash them to apply the technique. Now, the moral of the story and the important thing is, that bowl wasn't better because it was flawed, right? In fact, the first time when it came back with the black crude glue and the metal staples, that would have been enough. But here's the thing. It was better the second time because instead of trying to conceal the flaws, it was actually shining a light on those flaws and amplifying those flaws to bring them to life. And that's what made it special. And so that's really, in a nutshell, the message of pink. Our flaws are the things that make us awesome. And we can't change who we are. We can only double down on what makes us unique or consciously choose to do less of what others do as normal.
I like this concept that you're talking about of every strength, has a weakness and has, we're flawed human beings. And it was interesting, especially on social, where so much is choreographed and perfected, that the things that are doing the best a lot of times on social are the vulnerable posts, the vulnerable ideas, the things that are real. That makes us unique because we can relate to it.
Right.
I find that absolutely fascinating. As you've been creating these ideas through, your Goldfish series of books, and I really do like the pink one. I like the gold, as you've been talking about before in the pre-show, about this idea as well, about like having your vital few, and the pink idea of really focusing on what it is that you do well, your ability, and amplifying those flaws.
Right.
So then for Stan, what is your biggest struggle? Speaking of flaws, speaking of things we need to work on, we all have them. Like, this is the balanced growth show. This is about like what are we messing up on? What are we screwing up here? You have a family, you're trying to work on that balance as you're traveling and doing other things with your business now. What's your biggest struggle as you're scaling your business?
Right.
In losing that balance?
A couple of things. One is, and you would know this from having your own business, is trying to create a little bit of separation when I'm with my family as opposed to when I'm working on my business. Because we know that consciously it's always in the background. We're thinking about clients. We're thinking about prospective opportunities. We're thinking about commitments that we have. So I've tried especially during the pandemic, to really create some dividers or barriers between when I'm in work mode and when I'm spending quality time with my family. So that's always a challenge that I deal with. The other thing for me is, I can only be in one place at one time. And this is a challenge for anyone who does speaking for a living. I have one flight a day, and there's one seat on the airplane, right? And once that seat gets sold for a day, it's gone. So what do I do if someone wants me but doesn't have the dollars potentially for the investment for what they're asking me to do? Do you take it and just take that client on, and maybe you're losing an opportunity? So that to me is always a struggle of trying to maintain integrity in terms of what you do, and that battle between food integrity and fee integrity.
I've not made the full-time jump yet to speaking, but it is my favorite thing. I love being on stage. I'm getting more training. I've been doing it for years. I don't do it as much as I personally would like. I have a young family, and so I want to be here as much as I can. So I do the virtual speaking, the podcasting, a lot of these other things, half a dozen times a year. I'll get out on the stage, which, again, I love. But you're exactly right, because when you make that decision to book, on a stage, you're out flight, you're out time with the family, you're also out time potentially with other clients, or, maybe for you writing books or what, so your opportunity cost, it's important to calculate. It's important to also know what you're doing for which client so that you can stay relevant and not spread yourself too thin as a speaker. That is definitely a legitimate concern.
Right.
So I appreciate you, being upfront with that. What have you done that, boundaries, huge barriers, as you mentioned them, to make sure that you can't be in more than one place at a time, and you understand that challenge. But what are you doing to actively combat maybe some of these things that are probably more subconscious than anything? Those fears of, maybe I'll let go of another opportunity because I said yes to this one.
Right.
That's totally relevant.
Yeah. I think, and I'm a firm believer of this. I never want to put a proposal out to anyone that I wouldn't feel 100% behind fulfilling. That's, I think early I learned that lesson. You might say yes to something in the moment, but you never want to be in a situation, Dr. Travis, when you're fulfilling that commitment, you're not 100% present, you're not 100% prepared, and you're not treating it like, a full fee engagement. So I think I've gotten better that I'm never going to put a proposal out there that I'm not 100%, no matter what option. I always try to give options to whoever I'm speaking to, that even if they pick the lowest option, I have to be totally okay with delivering on that commitment. And I think that's such a big thing. In the beginning, and this is, if you do start to speak more and make it a bigger part of your business, there's a temptation that you can say yes to everything, right? And that's probably not fair to you or the client if you're a lot of times thinking, well, that's a little outside of my lane. You're better off finding someone who's a great solution and fit for that client, and then being there when that other speaker refers you or when it's the right time for that client.
Really great point. And I know this is why a lot of speaker bureaus and speaker organizations exist. So you can network with those right people and be there for each other. And I've seen that. And when that time comes, I love that. And I have done that before. I have referred out and said, it's a good fit. So I'm trying to stay in that lane. I'm trying to stay in my sweet spot. And quite honestly, trying to come up with another speech when I'm used to giving the one and only balanced, advisor speech to financial companies, like that's it. And I've perfected it. I've done, it's always needing improvement, but I perfected it to this point.
Right.
Tomorrow I'll do, some tweaks on it for the next time. But as you know, the more you become a generalist, again, back to your marketing idea, the less you become relevant and the less different you are than somebody else. Because if I think of Stan, I'm like, oh yeah, he's the goldfish guy. Yeah, I know who you are. You're the pink goldfish guy. You're the purple goldfish guy, depending on what book you're writing.
Right.
So, it's absolutely indicative of not only then and there, but the future. Being present. Let's talk about that one. And you've really mentioned this a couple of different ways. But what advice would you give to other business owners, entrepreneurs, financial advisors, financial professionals out there who are running their own show? How do you remain present? How do you block out some of those, that client looming idea in the background, or this event that I'm going to, but I'm here playing a game with my kid, or I'm on a date with my wife? Like, what is it that you would give advice to others who are struggling with being present?
Well, I'll give you the analogy, and this is not my methodology. There's a famous British kind of talent coach and speaking coach who works with a lot of actors and personalities. And she talks about this idea of trying to stay within the second circle. Her name's Patsy Rodenberg. And she says a lot of times we're in the first circle, which is kind of like our own head. So we're not with the people that we're, even if we're speaking, we might be thinking about what we're going to say next as opposed to being present with the audience. The third circle is what Patsy talks about, this idea where it's not a conversation. It's more like you're telling, right? And it's a one-way message, and you're really, you don't care how it lands or where it lands. You're just blah. And she talks about this idea that the second circle, which kind of sits between you being in your own head and you telling, is this idea of being in the moment, right? And being with the people that you're with and staying focused on the task that you're doing. There's a couple, there's times where I know if I schedule stuff, Travis, that it typically gets done. Like if it's just something out there that's on my list and I haven't actually taken a step to put time behind it, good luck if it gets done. The other thing is to have, I'm big on, I like the physical checking it off the list, right? So consistently each day, I love the idea of creating that little box and the little dopamine hit that I get when I can check things off. So, stay in the present, try to stay focused, make sure you're making, and I know you're a big proponent of this, make time, right, to do the right things. Focus on, the 20% of what you do that gets you 80% of the results. Yeah, that's my advice.
Love it. You are a consummate professional. You are speaking professional. You've authored, almost a dozen books at this point, right? I've looked at the series.
11.
How many? 11.
We're not counting anymore. 11
okay.
books, 18 total.
Wow. Awesome. Fantastic. If people want to reach you, stanphelpsspeaks.com, is that the best place to go?
That's the best place to find me. I try to live my own mantra. I lopside what I do on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
That's where I spend the most amount of time. So connect with me on LinkedIn. I usually post almost every day, whether it's a video or sharing on that platform.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stan, for being here. Thank you, listeners, for being a fly on the wall as we're bantering back and forth about marketing, growth, and balance. Fantastic episode here. If you've loved it, like, share, subscribe, do all the things. And we're excited to bring you more content like Stan in the future. And hopefully we'll have him back next time he brings out his next color book of Goldfish. In the meantime, everyone else, remember, live life on purpose.